Yes, it's fine.
Yeah.
But we need to send an email to people and tell them where they can find it.
Yeah, I don't know your YouTube website. I don't know how to.
Okay, I will just. Yeah.
So I try to find something.
Yeah, exactly. So, welcome everyone. It's a little bit of a rough start, but I mean, we have to go with it. I think this defense is always going to be different because of COVID, so I hope it's going to be okay. I have no idea if someone at home can find this site and know where it is, but if someone is there, welcome to my presentation. It's a very short introduction to my thesis, Doping on Demand, Permanent Electrochemical Doping of Colloidal Quantum Dots and Organic Semiconductors. I know for some of you this title might be very complicated, and I really hope I can make this a little bit clearer for you now in the next minutes. So first of all, what are semiconductors? Semiconductors, they are all around us, and we really use them every day. But semiconductors are, for example, used in computer chips. So we have them in our phones, in our computers, TV screens. We even have them in lasers and solar cells. And it's just all around us. We even have them in our washing machine. But in more chemistry and physics terms, what are semiconductors? Semiconductors have properties somewhere in between conductors and insulators, and the conductivity is in between those two groups. Common conductors are, for example, metals, and the reason why they're good conductors is because they have many free electrons. Those free electrons, they can flow around in the metal, and as electricity is the flow of electrons, metal have high conductivity. On the other hand, insulators, such as plastic, they do not have free electrons, which can flow around, and therefore they do not conduct electricity. Semiconductors, like I said, they're somewhere in between, and they do not have many free electrons. They have some, but because of that, the conductivity lies in between conductors and insulators. But the nice thing and the interesting thing about semiconductors is that we can dope them. And what that means is that we can inject either extra electrons or we can extract some electrons from them. When we inject extra electrons, those electrons can flow around like in a conductor, and therefore the conductivity is going to increase. And when we inject electrons, we call it an N-type semiconductor, because electrons have a negative charge. On the other hand, if we extract some electrons from a semiconductor, we have holes left, and those holes are said to have a positive charge, and therefore we call them a P-type semiconductors. And by using, for example, electronic doping, we can increase the conductivity of a silicon semiconductor by a factor of 106. And also in literature, we have seen that for cat-selenide quantum dots, we can increase the conductivity by 12 orders of magnitude. I am really not sure if you grasp how large that number is. It's a 1 with 12 zeros behind it. So we can really tune the conductivity of semiconductors by use of doping. This is actually not the only neat thing about semiconductors, but we can also attach these different types of doped semiconductors, which I mentioned before, N-type and P-type. So we can, for example, make a P-N junction. I'm not going to go into details today, but if someone doesn't know what it is and are interested, you can always ask me tomorrow. We can actually also connect P and P semiconductors together or NP and semiconductors together. And the reason why we want to do that is that we can make them into a switch. That is, electricity can only flow in one direction, not both like for conductors. We can also make an amplifier by connecting those different semiconductor types together. And this is the reason why they're used in so many different electronic appliances, because we can choose in which direction electricity flows, and we can even amplify the signal. But how do we do this kind of doping? The most common way of doping semiconductors is by use of impurity doping. And impurity doping is really just what the name says. We actually place impurities inside our semiconductor. And this impurity can either give electrons to the semiconductor or extract electrons from the semiconductors. Impurity doping is very common. It is commonly used for silicon semiconductors and also all the times. But unfortunately, it does not work for every type of semiconductors. And it does, for example, not work for colloidal quantum dots and organic semiconductors. And those are actually the semiconductors I'm working with, and which is the ones I have worked with for the last 4 years. So I have been looking at another way to dope those semiconductors by the use of electrochemistry. Many people are quite scared of electrochemistry. It's not necessarily something they understand or what they know about, and there are so many new things. I've actually taught an electrochemistry course for the last 2 years. I have had quite some students which I've supervised, and if you get the idea, it's actually not that complicated. So what we do in electrochemistry is that we apply a potential. And what that means is that we control the energy of electrons in our conductive substrate. Then we measure the current, and current is just flows of electrons. So basically we apply different energies to our electrons, and we see if they flow out of this conductive substrate, or if actually the conductive substrate gains more electrons. And that's basically electrochemistry in simplistic terms. So how we actually dope my semiconductor materials is that we place the semiconductor on top of a conductive electrode, which we call the working electrode, because it does all the work. It can either inject electrons into our semiconductor material or extract them. Then we place all of this in a solvent with electrolyte cations and anions to make sure the solution is conductive. So I really like the schematic. Everyone in my group has seen this 1,000 times, but this is basically how it works. We can change the potential of our working electrode, and at certain potentials, we can inject electrons into our semiconductor material. To neutralize the charge, electrolyte cations diffuse into the voids of the semiconductor film. And by doing this, we can actually do this by touching one button on a potential stat or in a nice software. And we can really tune the conductivity of our semiconductor material by, for example, 12 orders of magnitude. So this is actually quite a simple way to dope our semiconductor materials. And like I said, only with one button on a potential stat. And this is actually quite a nice idea. And in ideal world, I would like to inject electrons into my semiconductor, disconnect the film, and just walk around with it and put it in a device. But the world is not always ideal. And actually, when we disconnect the semiconductor film, the electrons gradually leave the film. And for you to understand it, you can think about batteries. The same thing happens in batteries. Even if you don't use the batteries, the charge will gradually leave the battery. And what I have been actually doing for the last 4 years of my life is to try to fix those electrons inside my semiconductor systems. And the way I have been trying to do it is to freeze the solvent around it. I know this sounds quite simple, and in real it is. I'm hoping if I freeze the solvent that the cations can't go away and also the electrons can't go away. So in chapter 1 in my thesis, there is my introduction, and this is basically what I talk about it and what I talked about in my last slides. In chapter 2, before I want to make permanent doped permanent doped semiconductor films, I want to know the process. So does the electrolyte cations, which diffuse into the profile of the film, do they matter? So does the size and the concentration matter? In short, yes, they do. So it's actually very important to think about your system before you perform electronic doping. In chapter 3, I looked at all kinds of different electrolyte solvents with melting points above room temperature. Then I want to freeze the solvent at room temperature. So how I do this is that I place my cell on this really, really nice hot cold place. And then I heat the empty chemical cell to temperatures, high temperatures, where the solvent is liquid. Then when the solvent is liquid, I inject my electrons into the semiconductors, and then I lower the temperature down to room temperature. And then I see if I have stable doped system. Again, in short, in this chapter, I was not able to read stable doped films at room temperature. And in real, I was actually only able to do it at minus 75 degrees. And for devices, this is really not practical because no one wants to keep their phone or laser at minus 75 degrees. Before I tried all the solvents or tried all the ways, I wanted to know why are the electrons leaving my semiconductor film. We actually work in glow boxes filled with nitrogen, and we also purify our solvents by pure materials. But I found out in chapter 4 that solvent impurities actually take away the electrons. And I tried to find a way to get rid of those electrons. I actually reduced themselves. And I was able to increase the doping stability greatly, but I did not get a stable doped system. Then at last, in chapter 5, I checked a lot of other solvents, and again in short, by using cyanoacetylamide, which has the chemical structure up here in the corner, and it has a melting point around 120 degrees, I was able to get stable P-type doping, both inside and outside of the glow box. For N-type doping, I was able to get stable doping for a few days, but after that, the charge actually gradually left the films, and we found out that's because of impurities. Then in chapter 5, I don't have this p-n junction, but I have it in this summary. I actually was able to make a p-n junction with the use of the solvent, and this is really a proof of concept that we can do it, and we can make simple devices by freezing the electrolyte solvent. At last, now I have shown you the work I've done for the last 4 years, but Ph.D. is so much more than only the work we do in the lab. I met so many great people, I have done so many amazing things. I picked a few of them and I put pictures up here. I have so many more photos, and really the last 4 years have been great. Thank you for your attention. Yes.
Cool passage, right? Remember the last quarter? Nice.
Make it a mistake. So make the technician.
No,
let's do that.
Our student.
Ah,
You said our name. That's only our name.
that's only our.
It's the new hour.
This is the new hour. That's new. Everyone is able to see the photograph live. I think this is the most interesting part. I want to keep the pictures a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Last pictures, the party, even though you can't be parties, I want one picture with you guys. I'm gonna stay here with that.
It's recorded, right? It's recorded.
I don't care.
Recent people at universities don't
Just
care
don't
anymore.
come close.
Scientists. This is a live stream, Mark. Yes.
It's a public live stream. It's a public live stream.
Was not a big one. You're one household, right? It was only at one. Mariam, you're one household, right? That was a good point.
But can people not just look in Teams?
No, there's a closed stream. Everyone's going to ask questions then.
Niet zo handig.
Zeg maar,
Ik kan het wel met een kamertje. Ja. Ik zou zeggen dat het moet
zo'n blaadje voor de camera.
kunnen.
Ik kan ook voor de camera. Nee, maar ik ben niet wel hebben.
He's gonna rotate, so they should think about how to that little pops already years ago for me that Ph.D. University. That makes sense. It's not.
Okay, oh yeah.
Because in your book and in the rest, this is all.
Welcome to this defense in the Aula Conference Center. Please take a seat on a chair with a green dot. Keep your distance at 1.5 meters. Thank you. Beste bezoekers, welkom bij deze verdediging in het Aula Conferentiecentrum. Wij vragen u plaats te nemen op een stoel met een groene sticker. Denkt u ook aan de 1,5 meter maatregel? Alvast bedankt.
But actually, that 1.5 meter starts from now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ferdinand.
They saw you on the live stream.
Yeah, but I'm not going to defend you if you get on TV and they say that you don't.
I blame Sorun for everything. She's gonna leave the country in 1 or 2 days, so I'm gonna blame her.
Yeah, I don't know if people will talk more.
I actually have to take one picture of all of you because it's very funny to see you all sitting. So
We never sit.
this is something else. Extreme work.
Now we are wondering, as Lynn said, why we didn't organize this from the beginning.
So he said that I could get their camera
Yeah.
and that their camera worked well, but it just doesn't work with mine. And we
That's
didn't know
typical.
that. So, and after we connected the camera, my computer didn't find my camera. So, and I started the live streaming with her camera. So that was the whole problem with.
I mean, they should have a laptop here, the university, for all the defenses and send the stream link to the candidate and say, hey, this is the link, send it to anybody that you want. This is a technical university. And thank you to remind me.
Which means we still need to learn.
But you have 22 viewers. So.
I mean, oh, this
We
is,
need
I
to
mean,
get a
it works. I
brand
think I sent it to
or-
everyone except people from my work. And
Oh yeah, I added a comment, the old one, newly.
Okay, I'm not even sure if the work will join. I mean, I've only been there for 1 month and I may have been at home.
I don't think even they know you yet. I haven't seen you.
I think I met like 3 in person out of 18.
Should be fine.
I let you
This is the most difficult.
That was nice. I think she was searching for a long time.
Hele tijd. Toch al goed.
A lot of things go wrong today. Sorry.
Het is wel een beetje een rolletjes worden.
Dat was een nieuw kost.
Bepaalde schoenen.
Ja.
Green dots.
De commissie. Mag ik zitten?
Ik open de zitting van de commissie ter beoordeling van het proefschrift en de stellingen van Zaldoen Gutschont Dottir, Master of Science in Chemistry. De verdediging zal in het Engels worden gevoerd. I request the promovenda to go to the lecture. A warm welcome to all of you, and in particular the online committee members, for the public defense of the thesis Doping on Demand. The Board of Doctorates of the TU Delft has installed a committee to evaluate the dissertation and propositions. The committee will have a debate with the candidate in public. It is an honor to present the members of this committee, to whom I extend a hearty welcome. On the screen, we have Professor Gamlin from the University of Washington. Then, to the right below, we have Dr. Smith from the University of Colorado. Then we have Professor van Markelberg, University Utrecht, in the top right corner. Then we have here Professor Mulder from the Faculty of Applied Sciences. Then we have Dr. van der Stam from the University of Utrecht, and the promotores, Dr. Savenaya on the far left to me, and Professor Houtepen next to me. Thank you all for taking part in this academic ceremony. My name is Ekes Broek. I'm professor at the Faculty of Applied Sciences also, and it's my pleasure to represent the rector for this occasion. I would like now to start opposition and give the word to Professor Gamlin. Sorry. The word is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Arvid Promovenda. It's very nice to see you. I wish I could be there in person in this event. Before I begin with my questions, I would like to tell you how much I enjoyed reading the thesis. I've learned a lot. It's an excellent body of work that you should be very proud of. I have a few scientific questions I'd like to ask you about, and I'd like to just begin by referencing in chapter 4 on page 76. You hypothesized 3 reasons for the observation of electron loss from your zinc oxide nanocrystal. And those who don't have that text in front of them, those were enumerated as an internal reduction reaction, internal reduction action, and reduction state. Zero. Secondly, cationions moving out of the film, and thirdly, solvent impurities such as water or oxygen. So what I'm curious about is the role of protons, H plus, and where among those 3 categories of protons. I'm particularly concerned about protons for a couple of reasons. One is because the way that these zinc oxide nanocrystals were made, it's done in a sodic solvent, and it's the hydrolysis and condensation reaction. So there are a lot of protons around, and past literature has shown that protons are present on the surface type of nanocrystal, and also your observation of an effective solvent reduction for nitrogen. That type of reduction is not pure outer sphere one electron reduction, it's a proton coupled electron transfer. So could you please explain, in your view, where among the 2 categories protons may fit in and how they may play a role in the block collection?
Hooggelegde afvallen. First of all, I would like to thank for your kind words about my thesis. And then, just to summarize it, you're asking about the protons and what role they would actually have in instability of my dot films. First of all, I would like to say I actually do my zinc oxide. Oh, first of all, do you hear me well and nicely? That's great. I do my zinc oxide synthesis in basic conditions. I actually add potassium hydroxide, and I do this in ethanol, and then I have also methanol. Though officially, this synthesis, there have been studies done on the surface, and they mainly have acetate and hydroxide groups on the surface of the zinc oxide quantum dots. Of course, there are some protons, but I would guess that it's not as high as you would think. Then, second of all, when we put the film in the acetonitrile solution, even though the pKa of acetonitrile is not that high, I assume that actually this quite some amount of protons are going to dissolve in the solution. So even if they are there, I'm not sure if they're going to be on the surface. Then, with regards, of course, protons and many other things can affect the doping stability. We actually didn't look towards protons. Really, we didn't do any measurements for that. We mainly thought about oxygen. And the reason for that is because when you take it outside of the glow box, we can see such a large difference. We actually did one measurement that was not protons, but with water and with oxygen. So I do not have those measurements in my thesis. But in the first year of my Ph.D., we actually did empty chemistry when we had the cell outside. We had also an oxygen tank, and we also added water. So we tried to see only the effects of water on the quantum dots without moisture. And oxygen really ruined my films. At least the chemistry was really bad from the start. So it's true, proton can definitely be a part of it, but I think oxygen is a larger danger in the stability of the dot films.
Would you care to speculate how exactly oxygen removes electrons from microscopically? What is the process?
Yeah, and this is also, I mean, if we touch to the chapter, for example, in chapter 2, then we use lithium, and we think that lithium actually intercalates into the zinc oxide quantum dots. So also in this chapter, we think that lithium intercalates into the zinc oxide quantum dots, and the electrons and the lithium then have fight large forces on each other. If that's the question.
Well, my question is that I agree that oxygen has this common effect. These electrons are unstable in the presence of oxygen, and I'm wondering, what is the state of the electron in the presence of oxygen?
Yeah, so the electron, of course, the oxygen can be reduced by the electron, and it can form an oxygen radical.
Yeah, so that's the part that I have a difficult time with, because that's thermodynamically uphill.
That's true.
One electron.
No, that's true. Usually that should happen at minus 1.2 volts versus ferrocene, and we are actually charging our quantum dots to around minus 1.2 volts. But this is an irreplaceable or irreversible reaction. So over long enough time, even if the reaction is very slow, it should happen. And if you look at the instability of quantum dots, this is happening over a long time. This is not happening in a few seconds.
So I would pose an alternative hypothesis to photons are involved and make that reaction no longer thermodynamically uphill, but now thermodynamically downhill. And there is some evidence that the photons transfer from the surfaces right now to photon coupled electron transfer. Which brings me to the second question that I'd like to ask you. There's a big contrast between the the availability in those three categories of electron loss and between oxidized and alkali. And you showed with isosulfide that you also still have difficulty getting stable electrons and the to make stable. And I wonder what's the contrast there that you see as most important between the oxidized and
So if I understand you correctly, you're asking why I see this instability for both zinc oxide and lead sulfide quantum dots?
yes. So do you believe that lead sulfide is also reducing dioxin?
Actually, the potentials I scanned to with the lead sulfides, they're not that much more positive compared to zinc oxide. I think I go 0.1 volts usually more negative in zinc oxide. And if we actually look into chapter 5, there I use, there I dope those both quantum dots in another solvents, cyano acid amides, and we see the charge stability, that is the doping stability. And we see actually that the doping stability of lead sulfide is greater than the doping stability of zinc oxide. And the main reason I think is because we don't go to as negative potentials, and therefore the thermodynamic force for the oxygen reduction is lower.
I wonder if you ever attempted to observe any reaction that would be derived from formation of oxygen.
No, the only thing we did with oxygen when we really put focus on oxygen was, like I said, it was really in the first year of my Ph.D. And I did this with one of my students. We put the cell outside. We had it outside of the glove box, and we had argon, and we flushed argon through the cell. And then we also got an oxygen container, and we flushed then oxygen through the cell, which was supposed to be pure oxygen. And we really saw this was actually performed at cat selenite, not zinc oxide. And it happened very quickly, very low concentration of oxygen, that the electrochemistry started to become worse. We did not measure the absorbance, but after a prolonged exposure to oxygen, they actually fell off the ITO. So I really know that oxygen is able to degrade my quantum dots. And like I said, in the end, there was some quantum dots floating on top of the solution. So oxygen is, yeah, it really does.
You're referring specifically to the lead sulfide or degradation by dioxin. Are you referring to the lead sulfide?
I'm sorry, you're a little bit rumbling, so I can't hear because of the additional sounds. Can you repeat the question?
That's okay. I'll move on. Thank you very much. Your response provided a nice segue to my next question, which is maybe something that is not included in your thesis, but I'm sure that you've looked at and you just alluded to, which has to do with the parallel experimentation using cadmium selenide quantum dots. And as you know, there's been quite a bit of work on electrochemical charging of cadmium selenide quantum dots and photochemical reduction of cadmium selenide quantum dots, where it's been shown that the surfaces of the quantum dots are extremely close. I wonder what your experience is for cadmium selenide, similar conditions as you described for zinc.
Yes, so the doping stability measurement I performed on cat selenite, I saw that the injected electrons, it took them between 2 to 5 seconds to leave the cat selenite. Compared to the zinc oxide, it takes around 20 minutes. So really, the electrons are really not stable in cat selenite. And we actually think that it's both because of those internal electrochemical reaction and also the oxygen. And actually there I can still even connect it to the oxygen, because there we actually have to go to even more negative potentials. And we actually go to that negative potentials where the oxygen radical reaction takes place. But we have also seen the instability of cat sunlight, and we have seen that by putting cores around it, or no shells around it, you can get very nice reversible electrochemical measurements, especially when you put shell. So cat sulfide, zinc sulfide shell, a little bit thicker cat sulfide shell, and a little bit thinner zinc sulfide shell. You can really have, if I can call it that, you can have very beautiful electrochemical data if you place those additional shells around it.
And so,
Professor Gamlin, are you satisfied with the answers to your questions?
I am satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you for the opposition, and I would like to give the word to Dr. Smith.
Well, meneer rector, waarde promovenda. Solon, it's very nice to see you. I also, as Professor Gamlin said, really enjoyed reading your thesis for many reasons. I had seen Arjen write the proposal for this project many years ago, and seeing him through there, I thought it was an ambitious and really exciting project. And I think that you being the person to kind of take the reins of this and to see your final thesis has really been a pleasure to watch and see. And I think you did a really fantastic job with a very difficult and intriguing topic. And also I've enjoyed, because you were in some of our initial electrochemistry courses, I've enjoyed discussing fundamental aspects of electrochemistry with you, so I would like to focus my questions on some fundamental concepts that I can hope that you can help me to understand better. And in chapter 2, you make a comment, I don't know where the quote is, but the quote is, ideally the charge compensation by electrolyte ions is uniform due to the porous nature of quantum dot films, resulting in a uniform charge density and absence of band bending. And that is the line that didn't quite understand. So my background from inorganic semiconductors tells me that if you have a semiconductor electrolyte junction, the depletion layer will form when there's a charge transfer and create band bending. So can you explain to me why for your systems with organic dopants, why you don't have overall band bending at this phase?
First of all, thank you for the nice words about my thesis. Then to answer your question, also if you go into like books like Bart's, if you look at the fundamental electrochemical literature, you can see that the space charge region is usually 10 to 1,000 nanometer thick. And as we have porous semiconductor films, the electrolyte cations and anions, they can really diffuse up to each semiconductor nanocrystal or even organic semiconductors. In my zinc oxide case, we have 3.4 nanometer diameter for our zinc oxide quantum dots. And therefore, as the cations can diffuse to them, we don't have any space charge region, which results in uniform doping and no band bending.
So I understand that for within the kind of bulk of this quantum dot film, but still at the very top of this film, at the interface, where there really is a discrete or even average semiconductor electrolyte interface, would there not be some accumulation or depletion just at the surface of the film that would cause drift or diffusion to the back? So, of course, when we are doing the electrochemical measurements, and if you look in chapter 2, before we have steady state measurements, I actually I describe it in the appendix of chapter 2 when we are saying why we can use the Rankin-Sakik equation. In the beginning, it's true that we get a diffusion layer, but in many of those measurements, we are actually looking at a steady state. So we give the system time to reach the equilibrium, and then the electrolyte cations should not accumulate. And I've shown that we actually have no diffusion limitation or mass transfer limitation. So then I can assume that there is no band bending. Okay, thank you. That does help clarify some of my understanding. That leads me to another kind of a fundamental question is when you're injecting charges by applying a potential to your electrode, could you get the same effect by photoexciting your semiconductor, which absorbs light and you can have charge excitation? Could you perform a similar effect by photoexcitation instead of applying an external lattice?
Thank you for the question. Actually, the person that knows most about this is actually next to you on the screen. This is really the research that Gavin has been doing a lot, and he has really beautiful papers where he uses photo excitation with maybe a scavenger molecule, and he is able to dope quantum dots.
Being an outsider to the field, it's good to know somebody's doing it. My first thought is, always comparing charge injection by photo excitation or applied by. So good to hear. So that maybe we can start to discuss some of the results you have in chapter 2. So you mentioned that you see through this process, you have a zinc oxide as your semiconductor kind of scaffold, and you see that there's evidence for intercalation of lithium and sodium, but for different cations, there's not. So I was wondering if you could discuss with me first the mechanism of the lithium and sodium insertion, and am I to think of this as an equivalent to doping silicon, boron, and phosphorus? Is this a similar type of not necessarily a solid state dopant like that, where there's a replacement of silicon ions? Is this the same process, or is it think of it differently?
Thank you for your question. Per se, I have to admit, we did not research this intercalation process in detail. We really tried to prove that we have intercalation, but it's actually very difficult in this kind of a system. So I tried to perform Raman and XPS. I know this is a little bit out of your question. Regarding the process itself, I would actually look at one literature, which we did not perform, but then there was zinc oxide nanobots, and it was more for battery research actually. And they really watched how the lithium just intercalated into the zinc oxide nanobots. It's kind of similar, like impurity doping, but it does not take an interstitial site in the zinc oxide nanobot. But I have to admit, I really don't know how it is in our zinc oxide conducts. I just know that it lowers the ejection potential, so it affects the conduction band, and it does not affect conductivity. So we know that it does not make an extra energy level in the band gap, and there are not shallow states when it hybridizes with the oneness level of the zinc oxide conducts.
Hybridizes, okay. Because I was thinking if you're saying it does not interstitially become into the lattice of the zinc oxide, even if it's just intercalating, that may cause some strain on the lattice. I mean, I guess quantum dots, I don't know if you guys think of that in terms of lattices, but wouldn't that cause some strain of your semiconductor material, which in turn I would assume that would affect things like conductivity, perpendicular conductivity, and so can you rationalize why you may not see that? If you really have an injection of these, even thinking sterically, these are physically, explicitly defined cations, to me that would reduce charge transfer, because to me that would not enhance the conductivity. So how can I reconcile that these are physically intercalated, but I don't see changing conductivity? Because that to me is counterintuitive.
Just to start, I completely agree with you. When we got those measurements and those results, we kind of didn't believe in them, because we really thought that the conductivity would change. And I actually measured this quite often because we were not sure if this really was true. But I'm not sure if I'm the expert on this topic. But basically what we saw is that it does not introduce extra stages in the band gap. So I'm not completely sure how it happens, but like I said, I only have this one literature where it watched the lithium intercalate into the zinc oxide nanorods, but I haven't looked at this in more details. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. It's just a curiosity, and I understand the discrepancy, but that's also, I think, the beauty of scientific research. We often get data that is counterintuitive, may not make sense, but if I trust your results, and if they're reproducible, then data is data, and it's up to us to spend the rest of our lives figuring this out. To kind of build off of this is discussing the lithium and sodium intercalation, but then you find the other set of cations, potassium, TMA, TBA, and TOA, do not intercalate. So without even knowing the full mechanism of how lithium and sodium do intercalate, do you have an idea of why these other cations? I can understand TMA, TBA, and TOA, they're kind of big, but why potassium doesn't also intercalate? Do you think that that's a physical steric effect? Is it a chemical effect or something else?
Thank you for your question. We also looked into this a little bit. I remember I looked into it with one of the postdocs that was in the room. And we looked at just the radius of each and every ion. We also know the radius of the zinc and the radius of the oxide. We saw that it did not take an interstitial site, but we actually made the calculation if it both had interstitial sites and if it didn't become a part of the crystal lattice. And the hydraulic radius of potassium is quite a lot larger than for lithium and sodium. So, and comparing that to zinc, it's even larger than that. So we thought true that it was just too large to intercalate either into the crystal lattice or an interstitial site.
And you think that this is something that can be overcome by looking at maybe different size quantum dots or different dispersion? Is this something that can be synthetically overcome, or do you think that this is a fundamental issue?
I mean, if you can make them, for the different sizes, I mean, still the zinc is not going to get larger, but maybe with different quantum dots, yes. So if you have different quantum dots which have a larger cation, then yeah, maybe I actually believe that it might happen.
So that's kind of I guess, 3 minutes. One of the questions I had is that you did a lot of work on zinc oxide, on lead sulfide, and are these mechanisms that you find for electrochemical doping, are these specific to these semiconductors that you looked at? Do you think that, I understand quantum dot solar cells are still, quite exciting, but, if I look at more standardized or industrially relevant semiconductors, silicon, perovskites, do you think that these techniques could be applied to these types of semiconductors?
So officially with silicon, bulk silicon, no. The reason why we can't do this is because we need porous films, because we need the electrolyte cations and the anions to diffuse into the film to neutralize the charge. But if we have a porous semiconductor, yes, I've actually looked at P3DT, conductor polymer, P3AST, fullerene, PCBM. I've looked at cat sunlight, coarse shells, lead sulfide, zinc oxide. So, and it works for all of those. Of course, I can add a lot more. I even got I don't know if you can call it an honor to do electrochemical measurements of carbon nanoribbons, and the process worked also there.
Awesome, that's clear. I was thinking more of the electronic physical properties, but the morphology, I think, is the key to doing this. If I have time, Meneer Rector, can I ask one of the propositions, please?
Yeah, with a short answer, that should work.
Very short answer, I hope so. So I guess I will read proposition number 9, which says, having previous job experience in laborious and even boring fields can help a lot finishing a PhD. So I wanted to know, do you mean by this that doing a PhD is laborious and boring? Is that why it prepares you well? Or did it give you some other preparation that makes the boring field seem exciting?
So actually, in my point of view, I think it's good for everyone to have a job, or every job that has been laborious and boring, because you can really appreciate that you can choose. You can appreciate that you don't have to be working in those types of jobs. And secondly, I really like my PhD, but in every job you have to do something that is boring. And if you have done that before, you don't have to do it all the time. You can just finish it off, and then you can do the fun things. I've actually talked about this with my supervisor quite a few times.
I don't believe that you find your work boring. I've seen you long enough over the years. I think you enjoy your work, so that's why I asked, because I don't get the impression that you're bored by this, but I appreciate your commentary. Then, Meneer Rector, I am satisfied with the answers to the questions that I have.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I'd like to give the word to Professor von Makelberg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rector. Waarde promovenda, I first would like to congratulate you with your thesis, which investigates if we could permanently blow quantum solids by electrochemical means. I have to say I have a bit special and even melancholic feelings when I read your thesis, because about 30 years ago I had a very enjoyable time with your current supervisor, was doing his PhD thesis in our group. And guess what was the title of his thesis? Charge injection and transport in quantum confinement systems. So things have moved on, and I think conceptually and also technically we have made big steps, and your thesis is a nice demonstration of that. So I would like to discuss a bit more in general on the physical issues and chemical issues of electrochemical charging of quantum solids. And there was already a lot of questions of Dr. Schmidt on the chemical issues, so I would like to start with the physical issues. For instance, the charge of the size of the cations with respect to the pore size. So what you see in your thesis is the fact that if I go to, for instance, page 27, figure 25D, that the size of the cations have a slight but clear influence on the charging characteristics, on the CV curves, capacitance curves. If I then go to the interesting results on page 30, figure 26, I see that the conductivity and even the electromobility is independent of the type of ions and independent of the size of the ions used. So, and first, these are results, and as Dr. Schmidt said, results are results, and we have to think about it. Let's start with it now. First of all, I have the feeling that the maximum charge density that you can achieve in such a quantum solid should depend on the size of the cations. If you don't speak about intercalation, which is a special case, of course. And my question is just, did you try to measure this maximum electron density in your films? And does it depend on the nature and size of the cations? Because you can make the reasoning yourself.
How can I have the opponent? First of all, I would like to thank you for the nice words about my thesis. And then regarding your question, I've only done that for lithium. Of course, in the beginning of my PhD, I played around and I really saw the maximum charging capacity I could see in zinc oxide condensates with lithium. With the other ions, no, I did not go further than to those potentials, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah,
Yes.
Because I think if there would be something of the nature being present in the whole thing, it would be probably the maximum charge density.
Yes.
I guess, but
I agree with you.
you have to look to the experimental results because our intuition is not always the good one. So then, second question about this: do you have an idea about how far your Fermi level is below the bottom of the conduction band in these systems? Let's say with the charge density that you have reached in your system.
So the Fermi levels should be inside the conduction band. In this, I don't charge them I don't charge them necessarily a lot. With lithium, I can go to maybe 2 electrons per quantum dot. In this case, I have less. I have maybe half an electron, up to 1 electron per zinc oxide quantum dot.
So it means you say that you have a degenerate system and that your Fermi level is really already above the conduction band.
I mean, compared to the numbers, I would say so.
Very high charge densities, yeah. Then you would also expect that you see this with your spectral measurements, with your optical measurements, that do you have signs for that from your, for instance, sequencing of the absorption?
Yes, so for all those different patterns, while I did the CVs, we didn't have it in the paper or the chapter, I did absorbance. So I did absorbance for all those different ions in the seas, yes. And we saw bleeds every time, reversible bleeds.
Yes, I was more thinking about the occupation of the energy levels of the system because, well, zinc oxide is reasonably quantum confined. So, can you see spectroelectrochemically? Can you see the difference between the occupation of the s orbitals and the occupation of the p orbitals? Is that possible?
So in some cases, if you're able to have good fields, but no, usually not. No. So you have maybe a very wake one as peak, but it's complicated and difficult. And this is also known in literature.
Okay, because I think at least with infrared absorption spectra, you at least can make a distinction because instead of quenching of the absorption, you can also look to induced absorption with infrared light, and then you can look to S to P transitions or P to T transitions, and they obey quantum rules very strictly, as we have seen with, again, about 15 years ago with the thesis of Alexander Sermon just before your supervisor's thesis.
Oh, that's actually true, and I have performed those measurements. I just didn't think about it, but I only did them once to show the proof of concept that we see intraband transitions in zinc oxide. But I only did it with lithium. I have it in one of the appendixes if you are interested.
Okay. Okay. Then maybe a short question about chemical aspects before I move on more other physical aspects. You already answered the question of Dr. Smith saying that you don't have additional proofs for the charge intercalation, so you say it's there, but you are not totally sure. There is an indication from the fast onset or early onset of charge injection. Did you think about ways that you can prove or disprove this intercalation very strictly, so without any doubt? Are there methods for that?
So there is a question about synchrotron measurements, and it might be that we will able to see there. But we tried XPS and Raman, but it's always difficult because if you think about how many lithium ions you have in the whole cell, and then you think about how many lithium ions actually go into the quantum dots, you really have to be able to see this very low amount of lithium that actually does intercalate. So we were thinking about if we would go again to the synchrotron to
so if you think about synchrotron experiments, what would you like to see the upon charging of your system? Do you want to see changes in the crystal structure of the zinc oxide? Is that what you want to see?
Yeah, those were the measurements we were thinking about. So in the XPS, we saw a difference actually. We saw a difference with the charged quantum dots and non-charged quantum dots, but we could not say this difference was intercalation or adsorption. So
okay. So let me go then to physical aspect, which don't know if you have thought about it. But, you know that if you go to the nanoscale, nanocrystals have lower melting temperature. There's a lot of issues about the surface melting, and for instance, it's evaporate at 200 degrees Celsius. It's unbelievable. While the bulk evaporation temperatures is something like 900 degrees. Just to give an example, if you now think about the solid electrolyte, once you have a charge injection, you solidify the electrolyte. Did you see effects on lowering of the melting temperature with respect to these bulk systems? Of course, probably less defined than crystal, because you have nanoscale voids, and so nanoscale surface. Is there any literature about it? So did you see it yourself?
So you fell a little bit in and out, but if I understand your question, you're asking if I saw a difference with this high melting point solvents on our nanosystem?
No. Because if you have a well-defined melting point over one of these solid lights, the solid light is in a nanovoid, so it has also nanoscale dimensions. Now the crystals have a much lower melting point.
Ah, yes, now I understand the question. I did not go into any details of that I mean, the main thing I saw was because of those nanopores, the melting point predictions was very high of my solvents. But looking at the quantum dots themselves, no, I did not go there, unfortunately.
Okay, Mr. Rector,
Yeah.
do you have
Now, for
time
the,
for the last question?
now, I'm afraid, in view of time, I would like to thank you and give the word to Professor Mulder.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rector.
Waarde promovenda. Let me start with congratulations on the completion of your thesis. Difficult topic, I have to say. I'd actually like to know a little bit more about what's actually going on in these electrochemical systems. So if you have your page 49, you have a schematic drawing of the cell, and you have your nice quantum dots on the surface on one electrode, and then there is a reference electrode, and also the counter electrode. And now the system is described as that if you apply potential, negative potential on your quantum dots, electrons are inserted. So I have to look at that as a kind of electrical conducting system where charge can flow in and then the conductivity actually increased even more. That I understand correct. Okay. Next question is, what's the role of your electrolyte there? And then I read, positive ions go towards the surface of these nanoparticles. And then the question is, what happens to the negative ions?
Popular opponents.
Yeah.
Thank you for the nice words. This is actually a topic which we never touch upon in the chemical doping and type doping. Of course, in p-type doping, it's all about the anions. So, of course, we are going to have both the working electrode and the counter electrode. And to finish the circuit, of course, there needs to be another electrochemical reaction happening at the counter electrode. So some anions are going to be there.
Yeah, exactly. So now my question is, how does that balance out? It looks to me like a kind of capacitor system. Maybe you know about supercapacitors. They also have electrolyte inside and a conducting nanopore surface. But then it's on both sides, not just on one side. Why would that be?
So per se, there would also be some cations at the counter electrode. But it's true, we only look at the cations when we inject electrodes. But of course, when we would extract electrodes, then we would look at the anions. I have to admit, I never thought even about this aspect of the electrochemical charge.
But if I understand your picture, you basically want to get your positive ions on the surface of this, negatively charged zinc oxide particles, for instance. Then the other ions, they should also be stored somewhere. Would it be of advantage to have a counter electrode that actually has a similar storage capacity for ions?
Maybe, yeah, but at least in our research, we never had any problems with the anions. Like I say, they usually are the counter electrode and they are the other half reaction, and they are, of course, then going to become maybe a little bit positive. You can have something else on the other side, but that's going to complicate the system a lot. Already the quantum dot system is very complicated. I actually did, all the research, like for example, impedance measurements, and we were trying to get an idea about all the transfers, all the rate constants, all the things going on, and already the system was just too complicated for those types of things.
Okay, but you're mostly interested in what happens with charge injection and using these electrolytes there as well. What would happen if you have just a flat plate? Let's say a thin film, the same thickness as your quantum dots have a diameter. And then you have also a flat counter electrode. Would that be an interesting system to study, or would you see different things?
So are you then talking about analyte in solution, or just a very thin film like monolayer?
Yeah, let's say, a zinc oxide film is the same thickness as your particle is big.
So you're meaning the zinc oxide layer would be very, very thin?
Yeah, just a flat layer, no nanopores, whatever.
So we were going to do some measurements about that, and that's true. It would be interesting to just really prove what we have here is not dependent on the thickness of the film. And if you have a very thin film and you see the same things going on as in the larger films, then you know that you don't have the pores complicating the system. So we were thinking about those measurements, but we didn't go into a monolayer. But there are all groups that do energy chemistry on monolayers of particles.
But the amount of charge involved would be quite a bit smaller.
Yeah, the charging current is a lot smaller. You usually have to combine this with something else. You usually would have an AC wave. We actually started looking a little bit into that, and maybe an amplifier, and then you would have to see what you get with the AC wave and have to Fourier transform it to see really what's happening. So actually with one other Ph.D. students, we started looking into the techniques, and we both had so much to do that it was kind of left behind.
Yeah.
But I agree, it's very interesting, and we really wanted to do this.
Time for still. Yes. Okay. Then, yeah, it has been indicated already. This lithium-ion intercalation in, for instance, lead sulfide. Yeah, very difficult to prove. I understand. But you also mentioned that the amount of lithium in the system is actually pretty small. Would you know of a way to make it kind of unlimited, the amount of lithium that is available during your experiment?
So, I mean, of course you can lower the concentration, but the lower the concentration, the less conductive the system is. So we also thought a little bit about, and we were going to try to perform it in XRD, where you can actually look at the
well, that's
lithium.
not what I mean actually. I was more thinking about the same issue, how to store counter ions. Or, I mean, you have a counter electrode there. What if that is just a source of lithium, like you have an electrode in a battery? So any lithium that is depleted, you can actually just get from the counter electrode.
Yeah, that might also work.
And what would you think would happen then? Or what could happen?
So, I mean, with the counter ion, if you should get lithium from there, I would always just be a little bit afraid. But this is just pure electrochemistry. I only like one part of my system changing during the electrochemical measurements, because otherwise, like I said, it might become too complicated. So getting the lithium from the counter ion, I would guess that somehow it's breaking down, and if I'm understanding you correctly, so if you have a very, very controlled system, it might be an interesting thing to try. But already having this control over our system, it looks really nice on paper, but some of those measurements, of course, it takes time to reach there. They're very delicate.
Okay. Yeah, you of course have an extra control. You have your reference electrode that you actually kind of use to judge where you are with your potentials.
Yeah.
But still, you think it's kind of difficult to run the experiment.
So I would be willing to give it a try. If I get the equipment and everything, and I can pick the system, and I can pick everything myself, I would definitely be willing to give it a try. But like I said, this is definitely, I would really have to have a control system. So if you want to go into details, I would pick zinc oxide, I would pick my gold electrodes that I make in the clean room, I would pick my electrolyte solvents, and then I would do first, of course, a reference with my system, and then I would replace the counter electrode, and hopefully it would work. But then I would have to see if there are complications, because what I've seen from my work, the simplest systems I do, and I do measurement, and they somehow turn out to be more complicated than I thought from the start. So, yeah.
Yeah, but also less boring, so that's good actually.
Professor Mulder, are you satisfied?
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you for the opposition. I'd like to give the word to Dr. Vonderstrom.
Bye, Promovenda. I also would like to congratulate you with finishing your thesis. It's an impressive body of work, and I've enjoyed reading it. Of course, I discussed many of the things already over the past few years with you, which has also been a great great pleasure, but it's also a pleasure to get to ask some additional questions in this ceremony. So my first question is about one of your propositions, and also there we discussed quite some things also outside work, like the prices of daycare and the importance of cookies. But my question is about proposition number 3, which is before combining electrochemistry on quantum films with other measurements, such as Raman and FTIR, it is necessary to have complete control over the film deposition. So I was wondering if you can specify this a bit more. What do you mean with control over film deposition, and why is it especially important for these 2 techniques and maybe not for the other techniques that you use?
Circular opponent, thank you for your nice words. The main reason why I mentioned those techniques is I actually performed those measurements with one of my students. And we really thought that we had control over the deposition of the films, and we thought we made the films the same every time. And then we went into the electrochemical Raman setup, and we got different signals almost every time from the start. And then when you apply a potential on it and you see a difference, or you see a change in potential, but it looks different every time, you have no idea what really is happening. So to be able to analyze this data, you really need to make sure that your original signal is the same every time. So yeah, in short, in electrochemistry, I didn't see this affecting our things. Of course, the film mattered, but with zinc oxide film and even cat cell-line films, if you made them in the same way, you usually got very similar results. In Raman and FTIR, it was completely different.
And what would be the reason for this, according to you? What were you looking for with these measurements, and why is it then so largely dependent on film deposition?
So yeah, we wanted to see, of course, what happens on the, if you can call it like that, what happens with the quantum dots during electrochemical measurements. I mean, what happens at the surface, especially with cat selenite. We wanted to see if some internal electrochemical reaction takes place. And then also when we inject electrons, we wanted to see if something changes to the surface. Are the ligands going to fall? Are they going to go off and in again? Or what really happens? And yeah, like I said, just we make the films exactly the same way every time, but like I said, the initial spectrum was different for the same quantum dots, the same way of depositing the film. And yeah, we were really not completely sure about that, why it was.
So this brings me to the follow-up question, which you already made a nice bridge towards. So the quantum dots are also stabilized by these ligands. So for cadmium cyanide, we usually do ligand exchange, and for zinc oxide, there's charge stabilized. So how does this influence your electrochemistry? And do you think that these charges on the zinc oxide are repelled by your electrochemistry? Or are the ligands on cadmium cyanide, for example, also repelled? Do they come back afterwards?
So actually,
what is your belief there?
Oh, yes. So there is actually a very nice paper by Hartley. So yeah, and C looks at quantum dots, cat cell-like quantum dots, and C has those. He does not do electrochemistry in film, but he does photodoping in solution, and C really looks at it in FTIR, and he uses those funky ligands with hyperprobes, and you can see that when you inject electrons into the system, the ligands pop off, and when when the electrons leave, I did not see a very clear signal for it, but it seemed like they came back on. But of course, it's very difficult that it was not photographed or anything. But yeah, the ligands definitely, they can pop off, if that's the correct term for it.
Yeah,
yes.
Dr. Hammerstone, thank you for the proposition. And I would like to give the word to Dr. Sahnay.
By the Promovenda, dear Slovo, I would like to congratulate you also with your thesis.
Please unmute your microphone.
Yes, sorry. As you know, I like working on semiconductors, and especially doping of semiconductors, and even making actually a real junction of a doped semiconductor. That's something which is really, let's say, the far quality. might have. And you did it also in the end, on page 121, you actually made a real junction. And we already discussed, Smith, we discussed how the normal electrochemical configuration, the electric field develops. And now I would like to ask you, how is the electric field during the doping of such a device, which you actually made? So you apply potential over the source drain, and you in a semi kind of electrochemical configuration. How do you see that the electric field develops in such system, and how is it then still electrochemical doping?
Zeer graag, de promotor. Thank you for the nice word. So I did not study this in detail, but I see how I imagine is that the potential actually will over the sulfide. Can I just ask, are you asking if the potential difference might be due because of the electrolyte solvent?
So let's say in an ordinary electrochemical configuration, you have the field which just falls off very quickly directly at your working electrode. And in this case, how do you think it develops?
So in this case, I have those gold interdigitated fingers. So one of them is the working electrode, and then the other one is a floating counter-reference electrode. And then I scan the potential, the working electrode from it, and both of them, one is P-type and one is N-type doped. So I agree the potential should plummet close to the working electrode, but also to the other working electrode. Does it make sense?
So your counter electrode is actually, it's not a source drain wheel measurement, you don't apply it. So it's not I would, if you would normally apply an electric field, I would expect that you have a straight, let's say, an evenly distributed electric field. And that's not the case in this experiment.
So basically how I do it first, yeah, I dope them. So I have two working electrodes, one I dope N-type and one I dope P-type. And when I do that, yes, the potential should be straight between them. But then I take one of the working electrodes and I make that into a floating counter reference electrode. So then the picture might change, but I have not gone into detail.
Yeah, because I was wondering if you apply a potential over in this layer, you would expect a certain evenly distributed electric field, and then at such high temperatures, you might just transport some ions up and down to this electric field, which can give your doping. While that's definitely not the same as what you do at the rest of your thesis, where you actually real kind of oxidation, which is compensated by the ions.
So actually, yeah, I do it at high temperatures, but then I still keep applying this potential difference when I cool the film down to room temperature. So, like I said, by making these PN junctions, we should have a linear potential difference at high temperatures, and then we take it out of the solution, we cool the temperature, we cool to room temperature, then we should still have this linear field. But then after that, we disconnect one of the working electrodes and make a floating counter-reference electrode, and then we change, of course, the dynamics of the system.
Okay. Thank you.
Professor Naya, are you satisfied?
Yes. Thank you.
I would like to give the word to Professor Otten.
Waarde promovenda. So I have another proposition from your list of propositions I would like to ask about. Number 4, I will read it because we're running out of time. Electrochemistry is a powerful tool, however, it is often misused and misinterpreted. Have you misused electrochemistry?
Yeah, the promoter. This is actually a very good topic, and I really wanted to tell you this, but
Thank you, Madame Biebel. I request Promovenda to take her seat again. The committee will withdraw for further deliberation in the committee room. The session is adjourned.
Even my whispering is loud. my whispering is also loud. It's a gift. Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Ask questions and I never understand them. And then it takes me 10 minutes to find out what he's really asking about. And then I can always let it go. So he's asked about then he wants cookies. And Leonard was listening to us discussing this. And I was like, Tom, I really don't know what you're asking. But then in the end, he was able to put it in the wrong way. And he was like, yeah, of course, this is just like this. But I always have a little bit of cookies.
I think it was not even a question, it was just.
At lunch, I want Tom. Don't ask difficult questions.
But I think the funny thing is, my mom was I was actually my promoter. She was like, why did he ask this?
This is Tom.
Yes, yes.
But the point is, he's a very nice person. But
Yes,
when
yeah,
it comes to
he's
science, he becomes very nice. He's a big fan of it. I'm not sure if he wants to do that.
No, but I mean, worst case scenario, you know, I might not be able to answer some questions, and I was just like,
You remember? Oh yeah, I remember about this. He asked me a question about
so, and it was actually, in the end, it was just like, I kept trying to say something to Tom, and then I just repeated it, yeah, and then I was just like, he doesn't have enough time.
Answer this question.
Ja.
We thought that we said the same thing.
The thing is,
I need more screen time. I'm trying to put the. I think this is what actually happened.
He also discussed that launch. Like he wants to say that.
Advertise your own defense.
11th January, be there.
I think he just wants. I think compared to this, he just wants. He wants moderate. I mean, like I said, you can do this, but I mean, you can also just give this.
You know what? You are not that. I don't think you want it anymore. She's the doctor. Come on. 5 minutes.
Very well. Oh, I'm happy. I couldn't answer everything, but that's.
It's not too good at answering.
No, but I'm just hoping that people could watch this.
Maybe.
Problems in
The
the.
second link worked very well.
Yeah, I hope just people found it.
Yeah, people were commenting on it.
So 26 people.
Oh, that's
26 at the top.
But, yeah, but I'm one of them, so.
So you just double checked. Or maybe all of you 20 were you maybe all like watching to like.
Lots of people from the lab were watching, and also a dossier from somebody.
Oh yeah, those guys. Dossier. Everyone's a dossier in this.
But seriously, everyone wants this. Oh yeah, I know, but the name, how many names do you have in different?
Family name doesn't matter. It's my first name. Last name is my name. The family name. I mean, people just call me by my first name. So we don't use that. Oh, actually, when I send an email to my son, I don't know them. I don't know them. Because it doesn't mean it. I would only do it in the English form. But no, I mean, I would never. But maybe it's cool name. I was something like this, but I actually think it's very easy.
We might have had instances also
No, it's just lights.
Another life.
Oh, they are putting the rest of the committee members that are online back on. So I'll just.
Ja, precies. Dat is wel fijn.
I did it. I'm serious. Look at my eyes. I decided for myself. But you can open an iPad. My I just like as a long time ago.
Maar dan vind ik het wel fijn als je dan gewoon een paper kan hier, als ik dan probeer aan te werken. I reopened the session and requested from November to stand in front of the podium. Het College voor Promoties van de Technische Universiteit Delft, vertegenwoordigd door de hier aanwezige commissie en de online members, heeft na kennis te hebben genomen van uw opschrift met stellingen en na een verdediging daarvan te hebben gehoord, met inachtneming van de bepaalde in de wet op het hoger onderwijs en wetenschappelijk onderzoek, besloten u de graad te verlenen van dokter. Ik verzoek de promotor door het College van Promoties als zodanig aangewezen zich wel van de hem opgedragen taak te kwijten.
Dank u, meneer rector. Uit kracht van de bevoegdheid bij wet toegekend aan het College voor Promoties, verklaar ik namens dat college, hier vertegenwoordigd door de rector magnificus en de overige leden van de commissie, bij deze u, zonder uw toetsen, te bevorderen tot dokter en u alle rechten te verlenen welke aan de dokterstitel zijn verbonden. Een bewijs hiervan overhandig ik u het diploma dat u het recht geeft om de titel dokter te voeren. Het betekent door de rector magnificus en de promotoren en voorzien van het zegel van de Technische Universiteit.
It is a co-promoter's privilege to be the first to congratulate the young doctor. First, how to come.
Learned Dr. Gutensdottir. Dear Sophie, I want to warmly congratulate you and your family, and of course Magnus as well, with obtaining your PhD degree. I'm sure that you have wanted to celebrate this under different circumstances, with more people and more alcohol, perhaps. The upside is that we are very lucky to have Professors Wilson Smith and Daniel Gamelin join us from the US today. I'm sure that Daniel van Makerberg could have been here, but these members, we are very grateful for them to get up so early and join this meeting. So I'm of course very happy that you have managed to complete your PhD, although really there was never any doubt, was there? And at the same time, it's very sad to see you, because while we now can call you Dr. Gutensdottir, I think your real title is Mother Gutensdottir. You have been the mother of our group. You took care of us when we needed help. You gave us foods and drinks, mostly beer, and organized group trips and secret Sinterklaas. And like a good mother, you were also not afraid to be strict with us and tell us to clean up our mess in the lab. And maybe the biggest compliment is that you could be strict without anyone getting mad or angry. And that is an amazing talent. It also meant that I could just sit back and watch how you manage my research group. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why did I say that there was never any doubt that Solon would finish her PhD and she would finish it on time? I think that is because Solon has worked in a fish factory. As she states in her proposition number 9, this built her character. Perhaps one of the nicest illustrations of this is when Solon wrote her first paper, about a year after she started her PhD. Her roommate, Jannica Lout, came to me one day and she said, "It is so frustrating to sit next to Solon and watch her write her paper." So I asked what was so frustrating about it, and she said, well, Solon just schedules in her calendar when she has to write, and then she sits down, she starts typing, and she writes until the paper is finished. And maybe that sounds obvious to work like that, but hardly anyone is able to do it, including Jannica and myself. Us mere mortals, we get distracted, we get bored, or we just don't know how to proceed. But Solon doesn't complain. She puts her head down, and she does what is needed. I guess that is what you learn working in a fish factory. But the nicest part of it is that Solon keeps smiling while she does it. Perhaps your PhD work was a little more interesting than cutting fish. I hope it was. Solon joined us at TU Delft in 2014 as a master student in chemical engineering. Then she joined our research group for her master end project, working with Ferdinand Grooseman. I immediately really liked how she approached her master project and how well she fit in our research group. So when I received the university starting grant in 2015, I quickly tried to lure her as a PhD student for that project. And looking back at the work that Solon has done, I must conclude that she has done exactly what we planned to do in the beginning. She simply made sure that what we tried to do worked. And that never happens. Or at least it doesn't happen to PhD students and postdocs that I supervise. So from now on, I will only hire students who have experience working in a fish factory, if they promise not to feed me fermented shark like Solon was. So then if we look at your work and your publication list, we see you have published 4 first authored papers in great journals like JACS and Advanced Functional Materials. Well, that last one may have been a little bit, yeah? But that's a story for after a few drinks. Moreover, you've really been the electrochemistry expert in our group. You've helped many others with their experiments, which is why you are a co-author on many more papers. You can be really proud of your results, and I think in a broader sense, your contribution to our research group in the past 5 years. Beyond being very efficient in your own research, you're an amazing supervisor of bachelor and master students. You have supervised a staggering total of 5 students during your PhD. And sometimes these were not easy projects, and there were cases of personal problems, the students that interfered, but especially in those more difficult cases, you have shown your talents as a supervisor. You've been very helpful to the students, but also very clear in setting much needed boundaries. Finally, I want to say that I will be eternally grateful for how you helped me with teaching the last years. Especially the last 2 years, I have been extremely busy, but I always knew I was not alone, that I could count on your help. I did not even have to ask for help, because you always came to me and offered it. And that was really, really much appreciated. I believe we had a great time together, both scientifically and also personally. And I'm still extremely happy that you joined my group 4 years ago. If I could keep you longer, I would. In fact, I tried to keep you longer as a postdoc, but I was fighting with 2 companies in Iceland, not 1, 2 companies that wanted to have you, and I lost. Iceland is a lucky country to get you back. I'm sure you will be great in your new job as a chemical engineer for the biosimilars company Alphatech back home. With your skills and mentality, any company would be lucky to have you. I wish you great times, and I hope that you stay just who you are.
Learned, Dr. Good job, daughter. You have now the right to use the title of doctor. Your doctorate means that society can rely on your judgment, that you will act transparently and communicate independently about the results and societal relevance of your work. In other words, your doctorate implies that you will uphold scientific integrity. I wish you a great deal of wisdom and prosperity with your new degree. On behalf of God, the doctors of Delft University of Technology, I congratulate you and your family on earning your doctoral degree. Dr. Gudjon's daughter, you may return to your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your presence. I hereby close this academic session. So now comes the photo. Yes, now comes the photo. No, it's fine. I think you can.
Let's stand next to them.
Oh,
really? Just tell us where to.
I can do. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
1.5 meters.
We make the.
Thank you. John's daughter. It's been a pleasure sharing this session. We met shortly by Skype, and I had already a good impression then, but definitely it was a nice defense, so you did a good job. And yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to give you something of your own, with a few nice words from your committee.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much all for being here. I have really liked it, and also thanks to being my committee member and.
May I interrupt because we're not finished yet?
Oh, you're not finished?
No, not
You get more congratulations.
I get more.
Professor Houtenpen.
I'm not sure I have much more to say than I already did, so you did great today. I have no doubt that you would. I thoroughly enjoyed all the time we spent together. I wish you all the best. Congratulations.
Dr. Savigny.
Yes. This is a very weird way.
Words is fine.
Great. Yeah, that's one of the first things. So you know, officially, also that's definitely one of the most important things. Yeah, this whole story about this water, I think it's very true. You were very, your presence was really
appreciate how you wish. Yes.
Thank you.
May I invite Professor Cameron?
Congratulations. Again, I just like to tell you how much I enjoyed reading about the work and in fact following it over the years. And I just think it's in there in person. Congratulations. So well done.
Thank you.
Dr. Smith?
Congratulations, Kimberly's fair still run. It was really fantastic to watch you over the years grow and learn and progress. I think you did a fantastic job and look forward to having a beer, maybe some fish in Iceland one day. So congratulations and good luck in your next steps.
Thank you. And see you there.
Professor van Makelberg?
Yeah, so congratulations with this work, which I think is one of the next steps forward in electrochemical doping of nanostructured semiconductors. The field which I still love to see progressing, although I don't work in it anymore. But it was very nice to see that it's still live and kicking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Mulder, please.
Hartelijk gefeliciteerd. Of course, we see each other normally in the corridor because my offices are nearby. And then it's always nice to have a smiling person. You always are very friendly. Now I know what you actually did, so it's nice to meet you.
Thank you. And then finally, Dr. van der Stam.
So, congratulations. This is as it is. And, as Arjan said, stay who you are. You're an amazing person. It was great to work together, but it was even greater to get to know you as a person. It was a pleasure to be part of this committee, although it hurts my back at the moment. So yeah, that's it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, the young doctor, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you all for the amazing words and thank you for just a great time. I'm really lucky to have met everyone in my committee members outside of today and I really liked all the hours. Just really thank you for being a part of this.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody for attending this event and we can close the lines now. Bye. Thank you. There will be a reception now.